Hello there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. It's Superfly Comics Guy here. Hopefully my voice doesn't sound too weird, but bear with me, I have been recovering from a pretty bad flu over the past couple of weeks, which wasn't a lot of fun, but I'm here today to go over one of the most important stories in DC's entire history, and that is Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Deluxe Edition. A massively impactful story with a gargantuan goal, but we're here to find out how this story holds up this many years later. We'll be going through the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip through where I can share some of my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on the story. So sit back, relax, join me. If you enjoy the video at any point, you know how to show it, and feel free to leave your own thoughts down below in the comments. And remember, when we hit 1K subs on this channel, which we are getting remarkably close to doing, I will be doing a omnibus collection tour for you guys as a little bit of a reward. So yeah, stick around and let's start flipping through this book together. Okay, so we're starting off with the dust jacket to this deluxe edition here, the 35th Anniversary Deluxe Edition. This cover here is by Alex Ross. I don't believe there are any other variant covers to this specific deluxe edition. Really incredible piece here, honestly. It's a bit of a wraparound here. You might be wondering, oh well, why didn't they use a piece by George Perez on the dust jacket, since he's the main artist? Yeah, would have been nice, but I do think Alex Ross did a good job of capturing the scale of this story. George Perez is known for cramming a lot of characters into his art, and I feel like Alex Ross kind of captured that here. This event spanned the entire DC universe at the time, and just looking at the amount of characters on here and stuff happening, it's quite an involved cover. Here is the spine for you, so that's what that'll look like on your shelf. And then the back. 35 years ago, worlds lived, worlds died, and comics were never the same. We got a cover price here of $50 US, $66 Canadian, and this deluxe edition collects the entire 12-issue Crisis on Infinite Earths series, and it also has a pretty large extras section, which we will get to later. But let's have a look under the dust jacket and show you what that looks like. And there we are. So if you were craving some George Perez artwork, there it is for you. As I said, he was known for just cramming so many things and people and characters on one single page. Rest in peace, George Perez. Wasn't super familiar with him, with his artwork before his passing, unfortunately, but this gave me a good chance to experience a little bit of that. But anyway, let's start going through the contents of this story, and I can talk a little bit about that. Okay, so opening up the book here, got some black bookend pages. Crisis on Infinite Earths. Keep going here. We got a bit of an introduction by Marv Wolfman, who was the main writer on this series. This is pretty interesting. He's talking a little bit about the creation of this series, Crisis on Infinite Earths, the idea behind it, how he was feeling that the DC multiverse at this time was just getting way too complicated, which I'll get into a little bit, and how they wanted to make a series that would kind of reboot the universe and simplify things. But he's talking about how it was difficult at the time to get a limited series like this off the ground because #1 issues didn't sell well, because people were like, oh, why would I want to pick up an issue that has #1 on the title when I could pick up something like, I don't know, Superman 300 and whatever, because, you know, bigger numbers indicated that a series was successful and running for a long time. It's interesting how that's changed now, right? Seems like everybody wants to do #1s now because they're easier to jump into. Oh, how the times change. This introduction does contain spoilers, though, so if you're if you don't know anything about this series and you want to go completely blind, then I would recommend reading that introduction later. I'm going to do my very best to avoid spoilers, keep things as vague as possible, even though I feel like most comic fans probably are familiar, at least somewhat, with this story. But let me set the stage a little bit here. So, this story was so important. It's basically, there's a pre-crisis and a post-crisis of DC, all kind of hinging around this event. So let's talk a little bit about pre-crisis. So DC Comics around this time were getting way too complicated, as Marv Wolfman is alluding to in his introduction. There are multiple Earths coexisting at the same time. Earth 1 and 2 and 3 and Earth X and all this other stuff. Different versions of the same characters on each Earth. So there's a Superman from this universe and a Superman from that universe. And they just felt that was too confusing for a new reader at that time. They needed a way to simplify the DC universe for a new reader. And that's where this series came in. The goal was just write a massive event with the ultimate goal being merge all these universes into one and kind of reboot this entire DC multiverse into one singular DC universe. And that's kind of what is so significant about this story. It was the first crisis. First universe reboot. Now, since then, DC has kind of fallen in love with this idea. There have been more crises since this one, like Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis. And I don't know, can you call Flashpoint a crisis? Maybe. Or Dark Crisis. But this was the first one. Okay, so how did they do this? Well, this story kind of centers around the idea that this multiverse of DCs is collapsing. One Earth at a time is being deleted. And there's a character known as the Monitor who is observing all these events, and he calls upon this character known as Harbinger to start gathering characters from across the multiverse that can try to fight back against this cataclysmic event. Which sounds, might sound pretty simple and straightforward, but trust me, this story gets very complicated very, very quickly. This is such a dense book, and you can see that even from how the pages are laid out in the dialogue, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So many different plot points start being introduced. There are these machines across timelines and across universes that need to be protected. We start dealing with overlapping timelines, the past, the present, the future. There's a heavy focus on equals and opposites, because I mentioned you have the Monitor, right? But then you have the anti-Monitor as well. You have a positive matter universe, and you have an anti-matter universe, and all these things are overlapping. Characters are dying, being erased. There's so much to juggle in this one 12-issue story, and the fact that Marv Wolfman and George Perez were even able to pull this off at all is honestly a miracle. Bringing in all these obscure characters together, literally like the entire DC universe, trying to juggle them all, give each character their time to shine. It's really impressive just based on that alone. Now, this story is very well known for that end goal, for how it managed to reboot the DC universe into one singular universe. But what about the story itself? So, not the impact, but how they achieved this goal. Does it still hold up? In my opinion, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, I don't think it holds up that well today. This is just 12 issues, but I spent about a month and a half on and off trying to get through this book. And its biggest problem, I think, is the dialogue. Very, very dated. Very melodramatic, very exposition heavy, and a lot of the times just uninteresting because characters are just describing things out loud that we can already see are happening on the page. You can definitely get used to seeing this face, for example, because this is a character known as Pariah, and he's, in my opinion, just the worst offender of this writing style. He's very annoying, very whiny. He's always like, oh, whatever shall we do? We're all going to die. We can't do anything. Why must I witness such horror?
Oh, come on. Stop whining.
And I get it. I mean, you could argue this is a Bronze Age book, you know. It's still from that time where the dialogue was very exposition heavy. But, you know, the times they were a-changing. You got to keep in mind, like, compare this to something like Frank Miller's work on Daredevil, which was getting pretty serious and mature for its time. And even the stuff that was happening in, like, Moon Knight's comics were getting pretty gritty and less exposition heavy. I mean, there were still elements to it, but I don't know. Even comparing this to other series around that time, it just feels like this was stuck in the Silver Age. Pretty campy. You know, villains get involved eventually too because, you know, they're impacted by these events as well. And initially their plan is to just take over all of the multiverse or something, take over all these different Earths, which is like, sigh. It's like, I was hoping for a little bit more originality here. And the other big problem I would say is that the stakes, like going back and reading this story, the stakes feel kind of weird because just a lot of the time you just have all these obscure characters popping in that I haven't seen before, for example, and honestly we haven't seen since. So when you have these kind of, for lack of a better term, random characters appearing, and we already know the outcome of this story in hindsight, it's difficult to care about every single character in here. But don't get me wrong, there are some pretty awesome moments in here. You know, heroes banding together and flying through the antimatter universe together. Supergirl has some really awesome moments in here. The Flash has some really awesome moments in here. It's kind of weird seeing a pre-Crisis Batman, actually, because it kind of reminds me a little bit of Adam West Batman. Not the grim, gritty Batman we're used to seeing today, but the type of Batman who will say stuff like, "Great Scott!" So I don't know, that made me chuckle a little bit. It's definitely interesting to see the characters, you know, reacting to the changing universe, the changing world that they're living in. So I'll definitely give it that. The artwork, man, George Perez, just immensely talented. As I mentioned, so good at cramming so many characters on the page and each one being as detailed as the last. And honestly, they picked the right artist to do it, because how else are you going to cram so much content onto the page for a story this big? But I do think the art style actually, that's its biggest strength, is also its biggest detriment. Sometimes the paneling can get pretty overwhelming. The flow sometimes can be disorienting. Sometimes you're not exactly sure the order of the panels you're supposed to be reading in. Like the panels will be going this way, but then like there'll be a piece of dialogue you're actually supposed to read before you move on, and it gets a little bit disorienting. Because, you know, keep in mind, most comics, even around this time, you're expecting what, like 6 panels per page, 8 panels per page, something like that. The art here gets pretty crazy. We're looking at like sometimes 12 panels per page. I think the biggest instance I saw was up to 15 panels per page. Like, let's just do a quick test. Like, let's just flip to some random page and just look how much stuff is happening. It's such a dense story, so much going on. It can be very difficult to keep track of. So yes, I do think this story, you know, it did well to accomplish its end goal, but the way it gets there is just pretty confusing and, in my opinion, not that interesting. Now, moving on to the extras in this book, a sizable chunk of this deluxe edition is just extra content. So that entire right side there that you're seeing, that's all of the extras. So let's take a look at some of those. I'm going to censor that left side there just to avoid any story spoilers. But we start here with an afterword by Dick Giordano, and he's talking a little bit about how, well, the outcome of this event, how DC became so much more new reader friendly after this, how there was an explosion of new series after this event for readers to get into. Like, hey, you want to start reading Batman? Well, guess what? We got this guy, Frank Miller, coming along to write a new Batman series for you. You want to get into Superman? We got a series for you. You want to get into Wonder Woman? Well, guess what? George Perez is starting a Wonder Woman series. Just an explosion of new series and kind of starting fresh with a new universe. And then we get a pretty chunky section called Behind the Crisis. And this is talking, well, we start off here. It gives you the rough plot for the story. There's actually a death list, which I'm not going to spend time on, but they have a list of characters who were planned to die as a result of this event. Character sketches by George Perez, some of his pencils and layouts, yeah, costume changes. Yeah, look at that. Healthy chunk of art-based extras. And what I also want to show you is, yeah, this right here. So this is the history of the DC universe. This section is massive. Now this is, I believe, created again by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. So what this does is, not only did they have to write the story or put together the story of Crisis on Infinite Earths, but now they were responsible for summarizing this entire new status quo of this singular resultant universe that they had come up with. So, if you're ever curious about what the new DC universe was like as a result of this event, this, I don't even know how many pages this is, but this history of the DC universe will give you exactly that. Pretty much every major and minor character involved is summed up here for you in case you were curious. Superman, Batman, Hawkman, all these characters, Wonder Woman. Yeah, it's huge. I didn't go through reading the entirety of that because, I don't know, in my opinion, it must have been cool at the time, but DC has done so many crises since then. They're always rebooting their timelines, it seems, these days, that it's, you know, I feel like the impact of this story has been kind of lessened in a way. But I don't know, that's just me. And then we close off with some biographies of the creators here, Marv Wolfman and George Perez. And that does it for your extra section. Now moving on to the build quality of this deluxe edition. We got 460 pages. I gotta say, I'm really not impressed with the eye at all. We got a mix of sewn and glued binding, but the eye just does not want to open up at all. Now, you don't really need it. I didn't experience too much gutter loss, and the pages have this buffered white space in the middle, so usually you're not really losing art to the gutter. I still would have liked a bit of a bigger eye, though. The pages aren't thickest. Occasionally you'll get some color bleed seeping through the other side. The pages themselves are pretty decent, though. We got some gloss. Well, it's not super glossy, but it's semi-glossy paper. I do like that you get page numbers, but you don't get a table of contents in here, so I don't know, win some, you lose some. But overall, I'd say the build quality is serviceable. But now, just to wrap up here with some closing thoughts, hopefully I haven't alienated a bunch of the readers who view this as their favorite story. But ultimately, while I really was impressed with the impact that this story had, what it was able to accomplish, I think that the way it accomplished it and the story itself just doesn't really hold up that well anymore. For that reason, I think new readers should just stay away from this, because if you're a new reader that's completely new to comics and you're curious to try out the medium, I feel like this is the kind of story that will scare you away because it relies heavily on knowledge of pre-crisis DC, the Silver Age and that stuff. But that side of DC isn't really that relevant anymore because of all the reboots that DC has done. So I think this is more for nostalgic readers. Maybe you were reading this at the time when it was coming out and you want to go back and reread it. Absolutely, totally understand that. Or if you're like me and you were curious about the historical aspect of this story, because it's known for its impact. I wanted to go back and kind of experience that for myself. And I'm glad I read it for that, but I don't know if I would read this again. There are other editions of this story. For example, there's like this big box set that has like even more content and all the tie-ins to the story and stuff. But in my opinion, this edition is really all you need if you're only interested in the main story. But yeah, I can't in good conscience recommend this to the majority of readers. But that's been my review of the Crisis on Infinite Earths Deluxe Edition. You let me know what you thought about this book. I imagine there's a lot of controversial opinions on it, conflicting opinions. You let me know, is this your favorite story? Do you agree with me? Am I just stupid? I don't know. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'll be happy to help you out with that. But thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope to catch you in another video real soon. So have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.